So this is an Algebra 2 video to answer questions from our viewing audience. I have had a few people ask about page 364, the 8.4 homework. They didn't like it. I also had some people working on the practice test that tried to do 22 to 25, and it's the same type of problem, and they didn't like it. So this will answer those. I'm not looking to do a lot of videos on the practice test yet. I'll have to see how we're going to do practice test answers later, because I think there'd be a lot of questions on that, and I have to do that in sort of a detailed way. But since the 22 to 25 is the same as this, maybe this will be helpful. This was late before we went on break. It might have even been the last day. But the scheme on this was, we had problems that we didn't like the way that they looked. So there's a thing in math called substitution that lets you change how things look. So substitution, for whatever reason, U is usually the letter that mathematicians use for the substitution process. For this particular lesson, the way we pick the U is always the variable thing in the middle. Whatever variable thing is in the middle, that was the U every time. And they were kind to you, there was no variety, there were no games played, they just played that pretty straight. The U was always the middle thing. And the way these problems go then is we're going to rename this to look better. So the 2 is going nowhere. The sign, the numbers, the other signs, the other numbers, no signs or numbers change in this process. You just copy all that stuff. But there's a magic transformation where the thing in the middle we chose to be U. And the way that the authors of the book were kind to us, the initial variable thing is just going to be U squared. Because whatever this is times itself, it's always going to be there because they created the problems to do that. Whatever's in the middle is U. The middle variable thing is now called U. The original variable thing is called U squared. And then for a little bit, the new part of that to your life is gone, and we're now in Algebra 1 again. In Algebra 1, what we used to do a lot, and in Algebra 2, what we continue to do a lot is factor. With the 2 here, I would have loved it if this were an even number, because I could have factored off the GCF. Unfortunately, the 9 is uncooperative to us factoring a GCF, so we have to guess. 2U and U isn't much of a guess, because that's the only way to get U squared. With a plus, we know these signs have to be the same as this, so minuses. That's not really a guess. But with 4, you have to make a guess. 2 would be a terrible guess, because 2 and 2 are both evens, and that could never produce an odd. 4 and 1 has to be the pair, and the way it'll work is putting them in those positions, because to check and prove it to you, that's a negative 1U, that's a negative 8U, together that's a negative 9U, and we're good. This tells me that U is positive 1/2. Switch this sign and make a fraction with that on the bottom. This tells me that U is 4. Just switch the sign. From here to here, that's Algebra 1. That's old, we've done that. Factoring, hopefully you're solid on that. If not, that was a little reminder of that. Watch the video again if you didn't get it, and hopefully that comes back to you. Now that we crossed this line, we've stepped back to Algebra 2 again. Our goal was not to figure out U. Our goal was to figure out an X at the beginning. So in class that day, I had circled this every time to just say we would return to that. So when we return to that, we do it by bringing it back. Root x is just the renaming of U. U is root x. Root x is U. The circling thing has established that for the duration of this problem, that those are interchangeable. So instead of U being 1/2, this root x is 1/2. And over here, this U is really a root x. That's 4. I switched the U's in at the beginning. I'm switching them back out. For this, and now we're just doing an opposite. Okay, the opposite of rooting is squaring. If I square the left, I have an x. If I square the right, 4 times 4 is 60. And that's one of the answers. You can plug it in and check, and that'll work. The other thing over here, we want to square again. The opposite of squaring is rooting. Square this, 1/2 times 1/2 is a 1/4. This problem, if I had gotten a negative here, I would have had to throw it away on a small, unusual, not very often happening thing. When this symbol is used, it can only equal positives. So once in a while, if they do a problem with this and it equaled a negative, you'd have to throw that away. The only answer would have been the other answer. The setup's the same for this whole page. The only difference is what this is. So if this was rooting, we ended up squaring. If this was x to the negative 1, x to the negative 1 is flipping. So at the end, we'd have flipped to get 1/4 and 2s. Or maybe this is squaring at the early level. If it's squaring at the end, you'll need to do rooting. There's always just some opposite to be done. This middle part's always the same. The switcheroo is always the same. The only difference is at the end, whatever you established in the circle zone, we'll have to do the opposite of that. So if the circle zone had x cubed, you'd have to do a cube root. If the circle zone had x minus 1, you'd have to later add 1. Whatever this is doing, it's going to resurrect itself down here at the end, and it'll produce for you some kind of opposite. If the circle thing is 3x, and you get down here, 3x equaled that. Instead of multiplying up there, you would divide down there. That's what that whole page is about on 364 and at the end of the practice test. Hope that helps.